When William Tecumseh Sherman looked into the eyes of his friend Ulysses Grant on that cold March afternoon in 1863, he uttered a sentence that would make history. "That is unmilitary, Grant. Your plan will ruin us." Sherman was not alone. Every Union general, veterans hardened by years of war, considered Grant's plan to capture Vicksburg the work of a stubborn amateur who would lead them to disaster. But what none of them knew was that Grant was about to execute one of the most brilliant military campaigns in American history. A campaign that would start with mockery, face impossibilities, and end with 29,495 Confederate soldiers surrendering on a single day. And all because Grant refused to do what everyone expected him to do. Retreat. Ulysses Simpson Grant was never the type of general the military books described as ideal. He didn't have the charm of McClellan, the eloquence of Hooker, or the aristocratic background of so many other Union commanders. What Grant had was something much rarer. An almost supernatural ability to see what truly mattered when everyone around him only saw problems. January 1863. Grant received the mission that had destroyed the careers of several generals before him. Capture Vicksburg, Mississippi. The Confederate fortress that Abraham Lincoln called the key. The president's words haunted Grant every night: "The war can never be ended till the key is in our pocket." But Vicksburg was not just important. It was impossible. Built on high bluffs along the Mississippi, protected to the north by a labyrinth of treacherous swamps, and fortified by years of Confederate preparation. Confederate President Jefferson Davis called it the nail that holds the two halves of the South together. Grant spent the first 3 months trying every conventional method the military manuals recommended. He tried digging canals to divert the river. He failed. He tried navigating the swampy bayous to the north. He failed. Every experiment, every attempt, was met with more derision. Northern newspapers started calling him an incompetent drunk. Politicians demanded his removal. It was on a rainy March night that Grant had his epiphany. He was studying maps in his tent when he realized something that would change everything. Everyone was trying to attack Vicksburg by the path the book said was correct. Grant decided to do the exact opposite. He would cross the Mississippi south of Vicksburg, march through enemy territory without supply lines, and attack the fortress from the rear. When Grant presented his plan to the generals on the morning of March 29, 1863, the silence in the room was absolute. Then Sherman exploded. "This is military suicide, Grant. You want to march 40,000 men hundreds of miles into enemy territory, without supplies, without communication, with no escape route? It's madness." General Frank Blair agreed. Corps Commander McClernand shook his head in disbelief. Even Admiral Porter, who would command the ships that had to run Vicksburg's batteries, warned Grant, "I can run the river down, but my ironclads don't have the power to steam back up. If your plan fails, you will have lost not only an army but our entire naval presence on the upper Mississippi." Grant listened to all the objections in silence. Then he said something none of them expected. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns. But there is one thing you are not considering. The enemy expects us to do the obvious. They expect us to retreat to Memphis and try again via the conventional route. But I will not retreat. We are never retreating again." Sherman formally wrote down his objections, stating that he considered the plan unmilitary and impossible to execute. Decades later, he would admit that document was the greatest proof that even the best generals can be completely wrong when faced with true genius. On the night of April 16, 1863, something happened that stunned all of Vicksburg. At 10:15 p.m., Admiral Porter's fleet began to descend the Mississippi. 7 armored ironclads, 4 steamships, and coal barges, all in complete silence. Grant had ordered, "All lights out, minimal noise possible." The Confederates detected the fleet at 11:15 p.m. All hell broke loose. Vicksburg's batteries poured 525 rounds onto the Union ships. The Confederates lit massive bonfires on the riverbanks to illuminate their targets. The sky turned red with explosions. But Porter had protected his ships with cotton bales, hay bales, and sacks of grain. When the sun rose on April 17, Grant received the report he needed. Only 68 of the 525 Confederate shots had hit the fleet. Only one of the 3 transports had sunk. The fleet was on the other side. Grant's impossible plan had just taken its first step. On April 26, 1863, Grant began the most daring operation of his career. He marched his army of 40,000 men south, through the swamps of Louisiana, building makeshift bridges with whatever materials were available. Yankee soldiers, with their characteristic ingenuity, erected bridges over 200 meters long using local trees, barn planks, and pure determination. Across the river, Confederate General John Pemberton was becoming confused. He had watched Grant try and fail at so many different plans over the past few months that he couldn't distinguish which was the real move and which was a feint. This confusion was precisely what Grant planned. While Pemberton tried to guess Grant's intentions, the Union Army crossed the Mississippi at Bruinsburg on April 30th. Grant would describe years later in his memoirs the immense relief he felt at that moment. "When my feet touched the east bank of the Mississippi, with my army around me, I felt the campaign was won." He was now on the same side of the river as Vicksburg, in enemy territory, without supply lines. Exactly where Sherman said he would be destroyed. What Grant did next shocked both Confederates and his own generals. Instead of marching directly north towards Vicksburg, he turned northeast. His target was not the fortress. It was the Mississippi state capital, Jackson. Grant had realized that Confederate General Joseph Johnston was gathering forces in Jackson to relieve Vicksburg. Grant decided to destroy those forces first. Over the next 17 days, Grant executed a lightning campaign that military historians would study for generations as a masterpiece of operational art. He marched 180 miles, won 5 battles, captured 6,000 prisoners, and took the state capital. All while feeding his army on captured enemy supplies. Grant's amateur plan was working perfectly. On May 14, Jackson fell. On May 16, Grant defeated Pemberton at the Battle of Champion Hill, the last major defense before Vicksburg. Pemberton, realizing he was surrounded, rushed back to the fortress. On May 18, Grant arrived at Vicksburg's rear with his 40,000 men, now increased to 70,000 with reinforcements. Pemberton and his 29,000 soldiers were completely isolated. Grant attempted 2 direct assaults on May 19 and May 22. Both were repulsed with heavy casualties. The May 19 attack cost 942 Union casualties against only 70 Confederates. Grant realized Vicksburg was too strong to be taken by storm. So he did what he knew best. He adapted. On May 25, 1863, Grant began a siege that would become legendary. His engineers built 15 miles of trenches completely encircling Vicksburg. Union gunboats poured more than 22,000 shells onto the city. The Army's artillery fired even more. Vicksburg citizens dug over 500 caves into the yellow clay hills to protect themselves from the constant bombardment. Inside Vicksburg, the suffering was unspeakable. June arrived with its stifling Mississippi heat. Food ran out. Confederate soldiers started eating shoe leather. Half the garrison was sick or hospitalized with scurvy, malaria, and dysentery. Ammunition was plentiful, but what good was it when there was no strength left to fight? General Johnston tried to gather forces to break the siege, but every time he approached, Sherman was there to block him. Grant had organized his siege with mathematical perfection. Nothing went in, nothing came out. Vicksburg was slowly dying, and everyone knew it. On July 3, 1863, white flags appeared over the Confederate works. General Bowen and Colonel Montgomery walked toward the Union lines carrying a letter from Pemberton. Grant and Pemberton met between the lines that afternoon. Pemberton, proud until the end, refused Grant's initial demand for unconditional surrender. Grant, realizing his army lacked the logistical capacity to handle nearly 30,000 prisoners, offered generous terms. The Confederate soldiers would be paroled, promising not to fight again until they were officially exchanged. Pemberton, seeing he had no choice, accepted. But he chose the surrender date with deliberate care. July 4th. Independence Day. He hoped Grant would offer more favorable terms on such a significant day. On the morning of July 4, 1863, the Vicksburg garrison marched out of their fortifications. They formed a line, stacked their weapons, and marched back in good order. The entire Union army present witnessed the scene in complete silence. No cheering, no mockery. The Union soldiers knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. When the final numbers were counted, the world was shocked. 29,495 Confederate soldiers surrendered. It was the second complete Confederate army Grant had captured in the war. The first had been at Fort Donelson. Additionally, massive quantities of artillery, small arms, and ammunition fell into Union hands. The Confederacy had been cut in two. The Mississippi now belonged to the Union from Cairo to the Gulf. That same week, news arrived that made July 1863 the most devastating month in Confederate history. On July 3, the day before Vicksburg's surrender, Robert E. Lee had been defeated at Gettysburg. The invasion of the North had failed. The two greatest Confederate hopes, Lee in the East and Vicksburg in the West, had been crushed simultaneously. President Lincoln, who had spent months frustrated by the inaction of his generals, wrote to Grant with words no other general had received from him. "I write this now as a grateful acknowledgement for the almost inestimable service you have done the country." Lincoln had finally found his general. The man who would not retreat. Sherman, the same man who had called Grant's plan unmilitary and impossible, publicly admitted he was completely wrong. "I was skeptical of Grant's plan," he wrote years later. "I could not see how it would work. But Grant saw what none of us could see. He understood that sometimes you have to break all the rules to achieve the impossible. The Vicksburg Campaign became required study at military academies around the world. Historians compared it to Hannibal's campaign crossing the Alps and Napoleon's Ulm campaign. General Halleck, who had doubted Grant early on, declared, "Considering the strength of the rebel position and the difficulty of attacking its fortifications, the Vicksburg Campaign must be considered the most remarkable in history." But what truly made the Vicksburg Campaign special was not the numbers or the tactics. It was what it revealed about the nature of true leadership. Grant had faced something few leaders can overcome. The unanimous mockery of his more experienced peers, the skepticism of his superiors, and the political pressure of a country demanding immediate victory. And in the midst of it all, Grant had maintained his vision. He had seen what needed to be done and refused to let impossibility stop him. When everyone said this cannot be done, Grant responded by doing it. When Sherman said the plan was unmilitary, Grant proved that sometimes genius lies in refusing to follow the manuals. The Vicksburg Campaign revealed something profound about Grant that would explain everything that followed. His refusal to retreat at the Battle of the Wilderness in 1864. His relentless pursuit of Lee until Appomattox in 1865. Grant had developed a revolutionary philosophy of leadership. In war, perception is more powerful than reality. If you act as if you cannot be stopped, you become unstoppable. Years after the war, Confederate and Union veterans would gather at Vicksburg to commemorate the battle's anniversary. A former Confederate soldier once said something that perfectly captured Grant's legacy: "We fought many Yankee generals. McClellan, Burnside, Hooker, all of them. But Grant was different. Grant didn't care what you did. He just kept coming. You can't beat a man like that." The story of Vicksburg is the definitive proof that great leaders are not those who follow the manual perfectly. They are those who know when to throw the manual away and trust their own vision. Sherman was wrong. The plan was not unmilitary. It was revolutionary. And the difference between the two is what ordinary people cannot see until it is too late. Today, 160 years later, Vicksburg National Military Park preserves the battlefield where Grant proved that the impossible is just what no one has been brave enough to try yet. Visitors walk the same trenches where 29,495 Confederate soldiers realized they were fighting something they had never faced before. Not just an army, but a general who had refused to accept that no was an answer. Grant captured 29,495 soldiers at Vicksburg. But what he really captured was something much more valuable. He proved that when everyone says your plan is amateur, when everyone mocks your vision, when even your closest friends say you will fail, sometimes the smartest thing you can do is prove them all wrong. And what about you? How many times have you given up on an idea because someone said it was impossible? How many times did you retreat when you should have advanced? Grant faced the ridicule of his peers, the doubt of his superiors, and the impossibilities of his mission. And yet, he attacked. The question is not whether you will have your Vicksburg moment. The question is, when it comes, will you retreat like the others, or will you attack like Grant? If Grant's epic journey from mockery to total victory moved you as much as it moved millions around the world, subscribe to the channel to discover more explosive revelations that forever changed our understanding of leadership, courage, and human nature. And tell us in the comments, what was your Vicksburg moment, when you proved all the skeptics wrong?